Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know that discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Hello and welcome back to I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Booncher. This is episode number 3, Dirty Bathwater. During this episode, I'm going to talk about the worst old dead body call that I ever went to. So first I'll explain the difference between an old dead body and a fresh dead body. An old dead body isn't an old person. It's someone who's died and the body's been dead for some time, whether that's a few hours or a few weeks or more. There's no chance of reviving them, and there are obvious indications of death such as lividity, rigor mortis, pooling body fluids, etc. So these can be referenced by other names, but stinker's the only one that I remember using for a body that had been dead for some time, and it's kind of self-explanatory. Of course, this isn't a term that we'd use when any friends or family of the victim were around, or any citizens for that matter. It's cop slang, and to be honest, it's probably one of the less offensive terms that are thrown around. A fresh dead body would be someone who's just died or literally died as a call or incident was unfolding. This would be a person who may be saved through CPR or advanced life support in the field or some other similar life-saving effort. So unless there's decapitation or another obvious non-survivable injury, there'd be an effort by EMS to administer life-saving treatment at the scene and try to revive those people. So it's the middle of summer and I'm a new patrol sergeant, having promoted maybe 6 months prior. I was a new sergeant, but I'd been an officer for about 12 years before I promoted, so I felt that I wasn't so bad as a rookie sergeant. And since I had recently promoted, I plugged a hole, so to speak, which means that I was placed into a vacant sergeant position for a squad that needed one. And the squad I plugged for was a day shift, Monday through Thursday squad that was made up of some very senior patrol officers. And all of these men and women had at least 3 or more years of time on the job than I had, and there was a couple of these folks that were over their 20. So I don't have to tell you, this brought a little bit of conflict and a lot of good-natured kidding for me as their new rookie sergeant. That day I'm sitting in my office and pushing some paper around and listening to the radio traffic, and I hear a call dispatch to one of my people regarding a bad odor and possibly that there's a dead body at a condo complex. My immediate thought was, oh God, this will be a bad one because it's hot out. I keep working and, wait to hear what I hear over the radio. So not long after he's dispatched, I hear him clear the call number 3, which means that he didn't find anything. So I don't think much of it, and I just keep working. Well, within a few minutes, dispatcher calls me at my desk and says, hey, the original caller called back on that odor and asked why the officer didn't do anything. And I guess the caller reiterated that the odor's so bad that they just don't even understand how the guy couldn't have smelled it and why nothing occurred. And it also seemed to be emanating from a specific condo. So these things are not sounding real good to me at that point. So I tell dispatch, hey, no problem. I'll go out there, and then I want you to dispatch that original guy back out there with me as well, and we'll get it figured out. So I drive out there in my sergeant's patrol car, and I meet the other officer in the parking lot. And when I get out of my car, it hits me. I mean, it's like getting punched in the face with odor that's so strong. And there is no odor that I know of that is more distinct or recognizable than the odor of a decaying human body. And I can definitely smell it from the parking lot. Got to be a bad one if I can smell it clear out there. So I walk over to the other officer and, smiling, I say, can you smell that? He looks at me straight in the face with a straight face and says, I don't smell anything. Now, this guy had been around a long time, and I never figured out if he had the deadest olfactory nerves of any human being in his old man nose, and he was a smoker, or he was gaming the system a little, as an old salt cop sometimes would do. So if you go on a call like this, what was looking to be a really nasty stinker, and you arrive and you can't, in quote, smell anything or find anything amiss, you clear the call. Well, that way you don't have to find the source of that stinker or the problem or get stuck on the call. And that's part of the reason that a sergeant would bring that initial officer back, so they could join in the fun if and when we did find what the problem was. If and when you do find the dead body, you would be stuck in close proximity and that god-awful odor until a detective could get there and conduct the formal investigation. And if it was a weekend late night, you might be there for a while. Well, if you're really unlucky, then you'll also get stuck helping the coroner remove and bag the body, which in the case of a long-term dead body sometimes entails literally having to break their bones or pop their joints to get them into the bag. All this while the skin is slipping off in your hands. A pair of gloves just doesn't do enough to keep splash and drips off of you and your clothes. I could go on, but you get the point. So you can see why a salty dog, why someone who's had to deal with nasty calls like this too many times during their career may just try to dodge out on one here and there. Anyway, back to the complex. So I start walking, let your nose lead the way, and it directs me to one of the condos in the complex. The odor continued to get stronger, reinforcing my belief, which I was basically there anyway, that this wasn't going to be a pretty one. And it was seeping out of the windows and the door of the same condo, so now we had no question as to where this dead body was. We get a door key from management and open the door. And again, you wouldn't think that it could get worse, but it gets exponentially worse. It's like just getting punched in the face again with that odor. And it's just, it has, and I've seen people start dry heaving at that and turn away, and they just can't go in there sometimes. And as bad as it was, I was always able to kind of control myself, and we had a job to do. We had to go to work, so in we go. So again, this was the middle of summer. It's just god-awful hot outside, and unfortunately the AC had not been set very low, so it was hot in there. And that just strengthens the effect of that odor. And there were a large number of flies buzzing around and doing what flies do. They land on you, they buzz your face, they crawl in your ear, and they just generally annoy the crap out of you at the worst possible time. And because you've done this kind of thing before, you know that the fly that just landed on your lower lip has almost surely been walking around on the dead body that you are about to find. So with guns drawn, because you never know what could have happened or who may still be in there. I mean, stranger things have happened with people staying in residences with people that are dead for months of time. We start looking around. Well, luckily it's a pretty small condo, and it didn't take too long to find the source of the odor. So I look in the bathroom and I found this dead body. But again, like I said, it was immediately clear to me how bad it was, and it was later found out the worst one that I would ever see in my career. I couldn't tell at first, but the victim was a man, and I believe he was about in his 50s, if I remember correctly. He lived alone in the condo, and we were able to determine that he'd been dead for about 2 weeks based on people who had last seen him or had last contact with him on the phone in the complex. So he had died while sitting or standing in the tub, and then he came to rest with his head at the drain and the faucet end. And we don't know if he was initially laying down or if he was sitting up or even standing up, but he came to rest lying down with his face up. It's funny, but it kind of reminded me of another dead guy that I'd had to help process who died in his tub, but with slightly different circumstances, because this idiot strangled himself while he was practicing autoerotica, which it's a total tangent, but I always think of these two together in the same time based on the way these guys, where they died. Anyhow, today's guy was definitely worse for wear. His body was slumped down, so his head was about 6 inches below the faucet and kind of cocked off to one side. His legs are bent, they're still in the tub, and both the knees were leaning to one side. Well, the faucet had a constant drip that had obviously been dripping the entire time. The body and the process of its decomposition had, we believe, clogged up that drain beneath it so that the water had slowly built up in the tub, probably in combination with some water that had been in the tub at the time of death. So by now, this water is black. It's stagnant like a pond. And like a pond, it's got things floating on the top and below the surface, and it's body matter, and it's who knows what else. And then, you add in the smell of this polluted, just terrible bath water, and it's hard to describe. It's definitely not something you're going to be dipping your toe in, that's for sure. So then there was where the water was dripping from the faucet. As the man's head had come to rest just under the faucet, that was the first thing each and every drip of water struck for 2 weeks. In the exact same place, kind of high up on the forehead and on skin and body tissue that was no longer living. So what this water did was it had worn about a quarter-sized hole completely through the skin and tissue to the bone of the skull. And then with varying degrees of rot as the water trickled down the head and into this soupy mix in the water in the tub. And it was really weird to look at, to see the white bone, and it was just so white, and it was still getting dripped on. And then you had the rotted and decomposing flesh that was kind of all around it. And then the beginnings of essentially an eroded trail where the water was running down from the head down into the tub. And this was the white of the bone and the it's hard to describe, but the clean path of the water washing down the side of the head was in such a contrast to the bloated and the blackened, oozing skin and body tissue of the face and his upper chest area that was above the water. So I stayed with my officer until a detective arrived to process the scene, and then I left both of them there to finish doing their jobs and wait for the coroner. And thank goodness for my guy, it was a weekday when the coroners would be readily available and should have help to help them do their jobs. Good for him. And if I remember right, I believe that poor guy died just of natural causes. So the rest of the shift, you have to work with that odor because it seeps into your clothing and into the inside of your nose and mouth. And basically until you can take a really good hot shower, you smell that odor every time you breathe in. I guess we all die. You just hope it's with some semblance of dignity. So with that, I'll close out this episode of I Barely Got Here. I appreciate you listening, and please check back for new episodes. If you have a question or comment, please let me know via email, ibarelygothehere@gmail.com, social media, or our webpage, and I'll do my best to address it. Sam42 is 10-7.